Welcome, 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 my lovely brothers and sisters. Welcome to another live book reading. And I'm still reading from The Orion book, volume 2, written by Wes Penry. And today I saw that my eyes went to this topic, Tiamat, the first construct. Why? Because we need to understand that the type of earth that we live in is in actuality the third construct. There have been two former constructs earlier. So let us start. And Tiamat, the first construct, and thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening along. Sophia's choice. The Queen of the Stars was not happy with how the universe developed. Not all developing star races became warlike, of course, but there were enough to create chaos in some regions of Orion. Also, the more the wars took off, the fewer beings developed into true creator gods. It affected the overall expansion of the universe, and something needed to be done. Thank you, brothers and sisters, for listening along and tuning in. Thank you. This is when the Queen of the Stars created a soul group that had full spiritual creative abilities from birth instead of first evolve and then leave the home world and eventually reach creator god status. So, which didn't always happen. Some races fell short because of their behavior. So the Queen of the Stars decided to create a world and a world environment in a higher dimension of the Ka/void, beyond the physical universe and the developing worlds, instead of using technology, which she had done when creating the developing worlds. She now created a new species and manifested this species directly into the Ka, or void. No technology needed. She created the human soul group, which is us. We are a creation of the Queen of the Stars known as Sophia. Then she equipped us with creator God status, or the status of being a creator ourselves too, from the get go. So from birth on. And this is where this sentence comes into play, where it is being stated in the Bible that the angels are jealous of men because we have spirit. They lack spirit. The ones that are pulling the strings on earth right now are in actuality fallen archangels and fallen angels, and they themselves in have now come in a state of depletion that they have become cyborgs themselves. So our bodies were not made from technology, contrary to our sapiens bodies and bodies in other developing worlds, but were dreamed up by Sophia in her imagination. And then we manifested in the Ka, or void. Our bodies were immortal and compromised pure spirit, and she gave our star race of her own spirit, fire, to make this happen. Therefore, we are a direct descendant of Sophia, and thus a direct descendant of the Queen of the Stars of Orion. And we could say we humans are all siblings of the Queen of Orion herself. We are her children, many versions of herself, inhabiting her traits. This is also why many star races in Orion call us royal. We are, in a certain way, royal. She wanted to know whether a star race with full spirit attached from the beginning, evolving on a relatively challenging world as newborns could develop without becoming warlike and hostile. And that is in actuality what we see in humans today. If we truly dive and go into the core of a human being, we still see goodness, we still see kindness, we still see beauty, and we still see a human race that is in actuality everything but warlike nor hostile. That is not in our nature. That has been inbred into us, but it's not part of our blueprint at all. Our blueprint is based on truth, beauty, kindness, goodness, and love. She hoped we, and empathy, by the way, also, and compassion. She hoped we would develop spiritual attributes even in challenging situations, such as love, compassion, and empathy, which are important traits when we create as creator gods or creators themselves. If our soul group could do it, it might solve the problem and the war problem in the Ka. This is explained in the West Penry papers. And West Penry called the first humans, uh, and thus us, the Namlu'u. Although I more often use the term three-unit consciousness in these Orion books. But in his West Penry papers, he speaks most of the times in the terminology of Nam Lu'u. And with that, he refers to the human soul group and thus us. In addition, the Queen and her helpers gave us free will with no strings attached to see how this would turn out. No strings attached means that if we humans in this experiment could graduate, we would not need to pay back the so-called debt. Later on, more about that. Our human souls are not supposed to be a loan. It is supposed to be a gift. However, the way things turned out, some adjustments to this needed to be done. More about all this later. So, the Queen of Orion, also known as the Queen of the Stars, also known as Sophia, also inserted a part of her own spirit in Tiamat. Tiamat is the first world where we, as human soul group, were seeded. Due to a gigantic cosmic galactic war, this world known as Tiamat got blown up. Earth nowadays is a piece of this Tiamat, and we can see this due to all these, what is it called? These there are still remnants left on this earth. I forget the word for it. Beings and um, humans who turned petrified. So here on Earth, we still see remnants of the Tiamat war that took place. We see this in the petrifying of trees, animals, and even humans, and even mushrooms and other, by then gigantic living creatures. The planet, so she could be close to her children. Our mother was only a thought away, and we walked upon her body each moment of the day. Even now, part of the queen's fire remains at the core of the earth, because what I say, this earth is a part of Tiamat, is one of the many millions of pieces of Tiamat, but is also unfortunately being guarded by an overlord council, as told in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. If the human experiment showed to be successful, which in the beginning seemed to be the case, the Queen would implement this evolutionary experiment on all worlds from there on, and eventually creation would become more constructive and warlike races would be less likely to develop. So in actuality, the human soul group of today is part of this experiment. We are the first experiment in this. So let us speak about the invader force and their ferocious captain. The experiment went well, and Orion monitored it to study the progress. Then the invaders came. As discussed in many of my writings, see the Orion Book Volume 1 or the West Penry Papers, The Fourth Level of Learning, which you all can find on the West Penry websites themselves. You can download these papers for free. All the links are in the text box, and otherwise you can go to another website where you have a web page completely dedicated to Wes Penry and his work. There you also can find these Wes Penry papers, first level of learning to the sixth level, for free to download. So in the fourth level of learning of the Wes Penry papers, you can have a more detailed summary. So in the Greek mythology, this invasion is called the Titanomachy, the War of the Titans, also described in the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creator story, and in other ancient texts. There has been some confusion about Enki's role in the invasion. Was he leading it, or was someone else in charge? I have found a comment from a reliable source that Enki was already here in the solar system when Marduk and the rest of the invaders attacked. He may not have planned the invasion, but was working with the queen, the Vulcan creator gods, the men and women of fire, and his brother Enlil, although under Enlil's supervision, which he did not like at all. As discussed elsewhere, thus Enki, already held resentment toward his mother. He also held resentment to Khan Enlil and his brother Prince Enlil because of his engagement in the creation process. It is unclear whether Enki was actually the brain behind the invasion. He could still have been only working in the background, pretending to be loyal to his mother. In earlier writings, I confused Lucifer's rebellion with the Titan War. I will go more into detail about this in the beginning of chapter 5 of this book, the Orion Book, Volume 2. It was the Syrian Wolfen reptilian Marduk who became the commander-in-chief of the invasion, even promoted to Khan.us.Khan.ur, or Syrian King of Kings. There we have this expression of the King of Kings. Yeah, what the Bible is mentioning. So we need to question the Bible. By the rest of the rebels, if he could utterly destroy Tiamat. It was he who blew Tiamat into pieces and sucked out Mars' atmosphere in the process, where a second part of the Namlu'u experiment was developing. So this experiment was developing on Mars as well as on Tiamat. All right, let us go to Marduk, the Syrian Orion villain. Marduk was the chief villain during the invasion, and this is why Prince Enlil came to dislike him so much, more so than he disliked his brother, although Enki began to shine in crime later. But at the time of the invasion, Enki had not committed any crimes anybody knew of. Still, if we think Enki is bad, Marduk is 10 times worser and has unfortunately since then put himself in charge here on Earth. So now we get more in-depth information whom are truly pulling the strings here on Earth. But who is this dreaded Marduk? So let us see if we can get some additional insight for better understanding. If we read ancient texts and the translations and the interpretations of such, we learn that Marduk is the son of Enki. According to my research and my sources, this is correct. Some of you may have researched the Egyptian story of Osiris and Isis and Horus, which tells the story. Osiris is Enki, and as we know, Enki is originally from Orion. Isis is at least half Syrian, if not full-blooded Syrian. Both Enki and Isis sometimes incarnated here on Earth together in the second construct, and when Isis in human form got pregnant, Marduk's avatar overtook the body as Horus the Younger. Hence, Marduk is half Orion, Ari An, because that is the real name of Orion. The actual name is Ari An. And half Syrian, genetically speaking, born here on Earth in the flesh. This doesn't mean Marduk did not exist until he became Horus. He, as an avatar, existed long before that. After all, he was the destroyer of Tiamat. We also know in Hindu mythology about Shiva. Shiva is stated as the destroyer because CERN has this statue of Shiva in front of the building. Before Earth even existed. Whether it was intentionally done by Isis and Enki to let Marduk incarnate is up for debate, or if Marduk simply took the body of Horus the Younger by force. Representatives from Orion also incarnated in the second construct to oversee Enki's project, and they would not have accepted Marduk. Marduk has been here ever since, incarnating in different bodies over and over and over and over and over again until the day of today, just like we do, but of course without amnesia. It is quite possible that he has incarnated into his own Orion Syrian bloodline repeatedly by taking the bodies of his own grandchildren or great-grandchildren. He is here on earth today, and if Enki is Lucifer, Marduk is Satan, the Lord of the so-called Lord of this world, as he is called by Christians. This leads to the question why Orion didn't capture Marduk when he was incarnated here, and why they didn't bring him to justice for the hideous crime he committed when destroying Tiamat. I have not yet found a clear motive for that in my research material, but there are still hundreds of material to go through and even more that I currently do not have access to, but hopefully will soon. One explanation could be that the agreement over who owns our solar system is still under debate between Sirius and Orion. The Khan kings probably insist that they had the right to take back what was theirs, and that the queen and her team are the invaders, not the Syrians. This brings us to the next question. Why did the Syrians invade the solar system? The real reason the Syrians invaded had nothing to do with Lucifer's rebellion, as just mentioned. In fact, by the time of the peace agreement between Sirius and Orion, which happened long before the Queen created Tiamat, and which led to the so-called business marriage between the Queen and Khan Enlil, the Queen showed the Syrians her goodwill and gave them a few sectors of the Milky Way galaxy, which would be theirs to behold and create in. However, there was a caveat. The Queen required to be allowed to put her own daughters, so to say, as overseers of these sectors to ensure the peace agreement was kept. So when the Queen and her team of creators and overseers had created Tiamat and the human spirit group, a few Syrians noticed there were beings walking around on Tiamat. These beings were, of course, us, the Namlu'u. And they said to each other, "What are these beings doing on our planet?" The Syrians believed our solar system belonged to them as part of the peace agreement. There was a big argument about this, which might continue up to this day. And the Orion Council firmly stated that the Saturn solar system did not belong to the Syrians. The fact that Orion refused to move their experiment greatly upset the Khan kings. So they decided to take back the solar system they perceived was stolen from them. So they destroyed the planets on which the experiment was ongoing, i.e. Tiamat and Mars. They didn't want to destroy the solar system, only the worlds which contained an experiment the Syrians had not given consent to, in their opinion. This was the real reason for the invasion. Thus, there were no other star races involved in the invasion than the Syrians, also known as the Khan kings. Although Orion is confident that our solar system belongs to them, they need, per Orion justice, allow the Syrians access to the solar system as well, until the dispute is settled. Therefore, in the second construct, there was a mix of Syrians and Orions walking about on Earth amongst the human spirit group. In all this, the Saturn star gate remained closed on Syrian request. Saturn was our original sun, between brackets, star. And when a star gate is closed, it means the sun is not sending energy into the solar system anymore, and no beings can travel through the star gate. So they needed a new sun, the substitute for Saturn, because our solar system only had one innate sun, Saturn. A hub needed to be created, which is our current sun, most likely placed within Earth's atmosphere. This is not a real sun, just a relay station. The Syrians, amid this conflict over ownership, apparently managed to negotiate that this hub, our so-called sun, was going to take its energy from Sirius A. So the Syrians also had come and had some influence over what they considered their solar system. Thus, our current sun is not what we see in the sky. It is Sirius A. So what we see in the sky is Sirius A, whose energy is directed through our sun to shine over Earth and warm it up. Since then, our sun has also functioned as a direct stargate between our solar system and Sirius. In the second construct, this worked as a shortcut for the Khan kings in our solar system when they wanted to travel quickly between our solar system and Sirius. So between our system and Sirius. When we learn that the stargate of Saturn, our original sun, was closed, it could also mean, on another level, when Tiamat was prospering, Saturn acted like a true sun in the Ka, which is the void, not in the physical universe, where it is a planet. But when Tiamat was destroyed, the entire experiment fell through the dimensions and to an observer. Saturn's light would turn off because its sunlight could not be perceived in the lower frequencies of the electromagnetic spectrum. Remember, the entire experiment happened in the Ka. For us, Saturn is just a planet because we can only see it from a 3D perspective. Therefore, when Enki formed Earth, he could not use Saturn because Saturn as a sun could not manifest as such in the physical universe where Earth was created. Therefore, a new sun created in the physical realm must be used. However, there was no such object in the solar system, so he needed to use solar energy from elsewhere. I would suggest he used the solar energy from at least one star in Orion's belt, perhaps all three. Then he created a hub, which is the sun we now see in the sky. Through this hub, the Orion solar energy can pass. Later, in the third construct, which we are in, which is called the matrix, this energy was cut off, and instead our artificial sun was connected to Sirius A with technology by the Sirians, as conveyed earlier, while directed toward Orion's belt. Our sun also worked as a stargate directly to that asterism. Now it is a stargate leading to Sirius. Hypothetically speaking, could it be that all the planets we see in the physical universe are suns in the Ka, or void, i.e., in the spiritual universe? Thus, there might be life on most of them, but not on this level/dimension of the universe. Star races usually develop on stars or dwell inside stars. Hence the term star being and star race. Perhaps on a higher plane, all planets are suns, manifested by creators for their own creative purposes to be used by them. But in the lower dimensions, these stars manifest as dead planets. If this is correct, we will find very few planets with life on them in the physical universe. If we want to find life in the physical universe, we should primarily look at the stars and what or who rather is inside them. Planets on this level could potentially be used as storage or for mining. However, in the third construct, the matrix, the construct we are in, our sun also became a, between quotation marks, weapon for the Syrians and for Enki with technology, because they can manipulate our sun as they please, making it warmer and making it cooler, shoot out so-called solar flares, and create solar minimums and solar maximums, etc., and adjust the climate on Earth. So this means that our climate is for uncountable thousands of years already artificial, and nothing is in actuality natural. Moreover, when Enki created the matrix, he used Saturn as the projector for the holographic simulation we currently live in. So we are living in a holographic simulation. So this explains why so many people have this question: are we living in a simulation? Yes, we do. Um, I take a little bit of chapter 4, which is Earth, the second construct, the fall into matter. After the invasion and the destruction of Tiamat, most of the Syrian alliance who took part in the invasion left the solar system, but some remained, and for a long time the human experiment was dead. The Syrians let go of the Namlu'u, who were in coma and were not able to escape together with Prince Enlil through the Saturn stargate before it closed. It was now Enki who saw his chance to shine, but not yet in a criminal way. He wanted the human experiment to continue. He said Tiamat was destroyed in the spirit realm, but bits and pieces of it had fallen into the physical dimensions and became solid. This is the asteroid belt we see today between Mars and Jupiter. So Enki, who was trained by the Queen of the Stars as a geneticist, proposed that he should be in charge of creating new human bodies that would be fit for the physical realm, where he suggested the human experiment should continue. So after Tiamat, the queen was determined to end the human experiment once and for all. It had failed, and she wanted everybody to come to her and go from there. However, there were star races who disagreed, for there were many who put their faith in the human soul group. So we have star brothers whom have faith in us human soul group. Most star races wanted a more peaceful universe with more compassionate creator gods. They said that we had done pretty well on Tiamat, and the human experiment went as planned and was very promising for the future. They thought we humans deserved another chance. Because the queen was eager to make the experiment work, she listened to these star races and she agreed that this was reasonable. So she made a pact with Enki and let him have it his way, so long as the experiment went on. If Enki could create functional human bodies with technology, the experiment could continue. It was going to be more difficult for us humans now in this denser part of the universe, and it would probably take longer for us to evolve. But time is not always an issue in the greater universe known as Orion. It could also be the case that those Namlu'us who fled with Prince Enlil through Saturn returned to complete the experiment, so the entire Namlu'u group could graduate together. I have no reference to this It is just a hypothesis based on what I believe Orion wanted. The reason I believe this is because the Namlu'u who escaped were still not ready to become full creators themselves. They were not evolved enough. So Orion might consider it better if they too completed their progress in the new physical world, which later became Earth. Enki took a chunk of the exploded Tiamat. So in actuality, Earth slash Tiamat. We are in actuality uh, living on a piece of Tiamat, although overlaid with a lot of technological overlays and thus a matrix system. So Enki took a chunk of the exploded Tiamat that had descended and fallen into matter and created Earth, which was a much smaller so-called planet than the gigantic water planet Tiamat, because he was thoroughly trained by his mother, the queen, in how to use Orion technology. He could create a construct that was much lower in density than our original planet. Although some 3-unit consciousness escaped with Ninurta through the sun portal, known as Saturn, before the invasion was over. Many of us went into a coma because of a tremendous shock. Remember, on Tiamat, we were still very, very young. 3-unit consciousness in development. We were possibly like teenagers in our evolution when the invasion happened, and we knew nothing about war and violent conflicts. So you can say we got, as human soul group, trapped into someone's malevolent plan. Hence, it was a shock for us, and the so-called raw material, for example, channeled by a person named Ruckert in the early 80s, tells us that after Tiamat, who is also mentioned as Maldek, exploded, we were in a coma for about 1,000 years. 1,000 years of coma. Wow. When we woke up from this coma, Enki was done creating Earth, and he had tried out different physical bodies, but had trouble making them work properly. From my discussion with certain sources and by researching ancient texts such as the Sumerian tablets, the Babylonian creation story, and the Gnostic texts, to name a few, I think we have a fairly good picture of what happened next. Enki populates Earth. In the beginning, before the 3-unit consciousness got invested in the new construct, Enki created a prototype, and then, here it comes, cloned these sexless bodies in the way he had learned from his mother. Still, he had problems getting human consciousness to stick to the inferior bodies he had created, but he succeeded eventually. Nonetheless, he had a hard time making us interested enough in his experiment to make us want to stick around. This was a lot harder than we remembered from Tiamat. We still did not have amnesia as we do now, and there was no between lives area in the second construct. We had some amnesia, however, because of the denser existence in the material world. Enki also wanted a solution to cloning, which took a lot of time and energy. So he came up with the idea to split the human body into 2 genders. We, humans, are in our blueprint androgynous. It was never in the original plan mentioned to have a separate woman and a separate man. This was never the plan. So they deliberately have splitted this human being into two genders, and that is why we now have a separate woman and a separate man. But in actuality, our blueprint is androgynous. Instead of being, and here it is being stated, instead of being androgynous, as we were on Tiamat. At this time, Enki introduced sex to the human spirit group. This was quite abnormal because usually in other worlds, star races mostly procreate through cloning. So this is how old cloning is. All right. We need to get more information about all these technologies that are being used in this world because nothing is new. By creating this new human, he killed two birds with one stone. He solved the problem with having to create clones, but by making sex pleasurable, he got us interested in the experiment. He told us to try it, and of course, we liked it and wanted more of it. I think sex really hooked us already in the second construct, something the Pleiadians often claim in their lectures. Even some star beings outside the construct are curious, wishing to come here and try it, and then immediately leave again. Of course, in the Matrix, we know that will not happen. They usually trap those who may enter the construct, and they will recycle these souls together with us. To begin with, we engaged in sex a lot, and we procreated and increased in numbers, and eventually all humans waiting in the astral for bodies eventually got one. When we all became mentally invested in this construct and our focus was much more on that than our true environment, we stayed on Earth, now more willingly to work toward graduation. On Tiamat in the Ka, the spiritual universe, we could stay planetary, but in addition, we could also explore the cosmos outside the planet. In the beginning of the Earth experiment, we probably expected to do that again. And to some extent, we probably did. We had more flexibility than in this later matrix construct. The third construct, and we could most likely move back and forth between Earth and the astral. Perhaps we were free to roam the entire solar system. On Tiamat, we were androgynous. There were no genders as we understand gender, and there was no death because we lived in the spirit universe, where death is non-existent. Now, with the experiment brought down into the dense physical universe, death became upon us. However, at the beginning of the second construct, also called Atlantis, Enki created bodies that could live for thousands of years. Orion was never happy with Enki's splicing into gender, and Prince Enlil eventually confronted him about it when he eventually came to Earth, but it was already done. So we humans continued hosting Enki's sexual Homo sapiens bodies. Sex for humans were pleasurable, and it made us procreate, which was the purpose. But sex soon also became a trap and a way to manipulate humans. And it is being used up to this day for this purpose. Each and every um, commercial is loaded with sexual energies. Now, in our present time, it is being used against to a large extent, just as it was at the dawn of Atlantis in the second construct. I am talking about metaverse, as Professor Sam Vakin put it, and I paraphrase: they want to create a society with no moral or ethical values, where everything goes. Then they want to put us in metaverse singularity while being in that condition already now, comma, in metaverse beta testing, people have already started raping each other's avatars. I am horrified by humanity's future in the metaverse, which is the singularity timeline. It is interesting when mainstream academics are waking up too. Then we go to Enki's first deal with Orion. The entire second construct is what we now loosely call Atlantis. After much brainstorming and by using trial and error, Enki had created all these new bodies, and we were attached to them. Therefore, he had proven himself able to use Orion technology. Being his mother's apprentice once upon a time, and he had created a workable experiment. However, this deal or agreement came with a condition. Orion must have representatives on Earth to oversee the experiment and even lead it. After all, it was the mother's experiment to begin with, not Enki's. Enki was not happy with this, of course, but he had little choice. Still, he wanted the so-called new humans for himself. And this refers also to what is in the Bible stated, the so-called chosen people. Considering us now being his so-called creation. This increased his resentment that he might to some degree had overcome when he was creating Homo sapiens, the inferior human. That was a way for him to shine. The Orion primary stronghold on Earth became what is today's Egypt. This was not, however, the first Egypt in the history of our solar system. When Tiamat and Mars were populated with Namluus, Egypt was most likely located on Mars. And when Mars was nuked and the experiment there destroyed, Egypt went down with it. But Orion re-established Egypt on Earth at the beginning of the Atlantis era, sending Ninurta, also known as Archangel Michael, as the chief observer to Earth. The reason we can suspect Egypt was founded on Mars is because of the artifacts they have supposedly found there, such as alleged remnants of Egyptian sculptures, such as ankhs, Egyptian statues, ruins, and more, spread over Mars' surface in certain areas. Researcher Billy Carson shared some of these pictures in one of his online videos called "Yes, we went to the moon. Yes, we lied about it." Fascinating video in general. The reader can use their own discernment whether these pictures are genuine, but they seem to be, and they fit into the bigger story of our human past. Although the original experiment was no longer the second construct, at least to begin with, seems to have developed quite well. So the density was, of course, much lower than now on Tiamat, but there were no major issues in the beginning, apparently, and Enki continued working with the rest of the Orion team to help humans evolve with the purpose to eventually graduate. There were conflicts between Enki and Enlil, but these conflicts seemed to work themselves out because of the unresolved ownership issue over Earth. This issue, as a matter of fact, is still going on unto the day of today. um, so there were also Syrians here on Earth already in the second construct, both those who worked for Marduk during the invasion and those who were still loyal to Orion, the so-called Dag warriors being part of the Mech and Mak army. All these Syrians were here in human bodies, and we often see them depicted in ancient texts with animal heads, implying they were so-called gods in human garments slash bodies. These ETs did not look as depicted in the Sumerian tablets. Of course, it was just the way the ancient artists depicted their traits and characters, such as dogs, cats, crocodiles, hyenas, lions, and so on. They compared these gods with what existed in the animal kingdom on Earth. There were also representatives of other star races here, working with the Orions. However, there was one being that was not welcome on Earth, and that was Marduk. So Prince Ninurta slash Archangel Michael and the other Arians that were here then knew Marduk destroyed Tiamat. It seems to me that Ninurta, also known as Prince Enlil, had a special horn on the side of Marduk for personal reasons as well, after the original human spirit group was formed. The queen gave the solar system to Ninurta as a gift. This means Ninurta was responsible for the safety of Tiamat and the solar system. When Marduk invaded and won the battle, it created a lot of resentment in Ninurta. Perhaps he felt he had failed to protect us and he blamed Marduk for it. He was the name figure who definitely did not want Marduk on Earth. I see no reason why Enki wanted Marduk here either at this time, but Marduk had other plans because he was the leader of the Syrians and considered himself having the right to be here. After all, it was his planet, according to his own conviction. So now we go to Marduk becomes Enki's so-called son. The cosmic, between quotation marks, family tree is complicated and does not resemble the family trees we rely on for human genealogy. In the universe, the term next of kin rarely pertains to physical families, unless we discuss the developing worlds where it could be relevant. Therefore, when we relate Marduk to Enki, saying he is Enki's so-called son, it is not exactly what we think it is. Marduk, as a two-unit consciousness, is a Syrian. When he invaded the solar system and destroyed Tiamat, there was, as we have discussed, no relationship between him and Enki as we know. So Enki is from Orion, but there was also an important female player, a goddess on Earth during the second construct. incarnating here. Some claim she might still be here. Enki was infamous for being a heavy drinker of alcohol when he was on Earth, and he secretly slept with human women. But obviously, he also had sex with ETs in human bodies, such as the Syrian born Isis. He was also known as a seducer and, of course, as a trickster. And I also am reading a book from Wes Penry that is all about Isis. And it seems that Princess Diana was the incarnation of Isis. And that explains also the entire Isis symbolism around Princess Diana. But so were Ishtar and Aphrodite, both alternative titles for Isis. After Enki and Isis had sex, she got pregnant and Marduk incarnated into that body as Horus. He is here up to this day, as discussed earlier, incarnated somewhere in a human body. And it seems, from what I have come to understand through the Wes Penry papers, it seems that Marduk is reigning in the Middle East. And so this could explain all the things that are happening in the Middle East, as well as in Gaza, in Palestine, and so on. So then we need to see who is then ruling what is known as America. Could that be Enki? And could Enki be, and this is just my thought, could Enki be incarnated in this so-called Trump figure? Because I know that he is in actuality not a real human anymore. The real Trump person has been taken out a long time ago. And due to all the things that he is doing, we need to ask questions. Could he be an incarnation of Enki himself? It could be. It is just a thought that I have. Again, from what I have understood, the Middle East is reigned by Marduk. So this also could be that this whole Netanyahu figure could have some essence of Marduk in him, which explains his way of evilness and being able to do the things that he is doing. So we need to question all that is happening in the world and have us detached from mainstream media, and let us focus on ancient texts and see if we can find dots with the situation that we are now in here on earth. So after Ninurta and Marduk had many feuds between them during the second construct. We also know, because of ancient texts, that Marduk once tried to take Egypt by force and make himself king of Egypt. So Marduk once tried to take Egypt by force and make himself king of Egypt. But the attempted coup was discovered and Marduk fled and locked himself inside the Great Pyramid at Giza and escaped through a hidden door located inside the chamber where he took refuge. All right. The chaotic end of the second construct. Because time here on Earth is considered linear, measuring time becomes quite difficult, particularly so the farther back in time we go, the time measuring systems will soon become inaccurate, because time here is rather cyclic than linear. as discussed in the Orion Book, Volume 1, according to how archaeology and science in general measure time, the pyramids, the Sphinx, and more are considered being constructs within this matrix, the third construct, which is inaccurate. They are from the second construct, when Orion were here. The same thing applies to many ancient texts, such as the Sumerian and Babylonian texts. Some or many of them may have been written 5 till 7,000 years ago, but the cuneiform, for example, is often telling a more ancient history that dictated by the gods, often channeled and scribed by humans. A significant part of the texts refers to a time before the flood, and time events are also mixed up because we must remember that these gods who dictated the stories to the scribes told these stories in a manner that suited them. So this makes indeed that we need to question holy books. Yeah, we need to question the Bible. All those people whom say that is the word of God, that is not the case at all. There have been many changements done to the Bible. So we need to take out what is still suitable. And these gods made them look the way they wanted us to portray them. Therefore, many events ascribed to have happened in the matrix happened in actuality in the second construct, such as the story of Isis and Osiris and much more. The entire Atlantis era and that of Lemuria or Mu were of the second construct. As the Atlantis era progressed and humans progressed with it, Enki started experimenting with, again, genetics. He created many prototypes that he abandoned, letting them run free on the planet where they created havoc, mayhem. His fellow Syrians and others also incarnated here and raped and seduced human women, which is not in the least allowed. The children who therefore had alien DNA mixed with human DNA became the Nephilim, so often discussed, the giants of renown. Many of those became cannibals and some ate human flesh. If we try to analyze Enki's psychological profile, we can see he is very impulsive, just like psychopaths are. And the reason for this out-of-mind experiments in genetics at the end of the Atlantic era was probably because he wanted to show off again by creating better vehicles. I would argue that after the fallen angels had raped and contaminated the experiment, Enki tried to create new types of bodies to save, between quotation marks, his creation, but he messed it all up. He completely failed, which must have made him furious. And at the other end of things, Ninurta failed too, because he had been given the solar system as a gift by the mother to protect and keep secure. But because of the invaders, he failed to do so. And at the end of Atlantis, he failed to save the experiment. He was probably furious at Enki at this point. Well, it seems everybody was furious at everybody. Which often is the consequence when mentally ill people, such as the Syrians, Enki and Marduk, operate. So to make a long story short, the entire experiment turned sour and was heavily contaminated with Enki's out-of-control play with genetics and the mix of ET and human DNA. And this is a suffering that we are still suffering until the day of today. The entire planet was a complete and total mess. There was no longer any genuine progress here on Orion. So, Orion saw that there was no way to save the experiment, so Khan and Lil decided to end it and call the human soul group home to Orion again. The plan was to flood the planet. So here we have the entire flood story. So, some words about Noah's flood. There are those who have criticized Orion for instigating the flood on us, and that is understandable. From what I hear, many think this was a betrayal on behalf of our creators. However, there are a few things to keep in mind. First, as we know from the West Penry papers, Orion cannot save us unless we come together as a spirit group and tell the overlords or the global elites we have had enough of all this. Then Orion can intervene because we do not have the resources to fight the overlords. At that point, Orion will heed our call for help. So we need to speak out that we are done with all this. We have enough. And we need to set a boundary against all these overlords that are still pulling the strings here. So Orion will heed our call for help. That will make Orion act on our behalf, because then they will operate under our free will. As it stands now, in present time, it is difficult for them to intervene because the human soul group has showed no interest, sadly enough, in putting an end to this construct. We need to end this. We need to say we have enough. We are done with this stupid construct, this stupid matrix. This is something that was also mentioned in the raw material. For those outside the matrix to intervene, there must be a cry for help. But this cry needs to be done by the whole human soul group, as a whole group. And it must come from the group at large. By the time of the deluge, a similar thing must have happened. So the human soul group was crying for help because their existence on earth became unbearable. Second, what the flood did was to wipe out the Homo sapiens bodies, i.e. Enki's model, and we could return to our native state in the Ka, which is the spiritual universe, without the physical connection to the material world. In that sense, we would evolve. Like, between quotation marks, Jesus said, we must cast off our garments, our physical bodies. Those who were so-called worship the physical body have no place in, between quotation marks, God's kingdom. This was changed from queendom to kingdom. We need to speak in terminology of queendom. Yeah? And from queen to God. So we need to replace this whole God idea into queen. The concept is still valid. The Orion, our physical bodies, are an abomination because we are spirit to begin with. We are not physical beings. We fell into matter when Enki seduced us into these bodies through sex. If we had stayed on Tiamat and the Syrians had left us alone, we would have graduated a long time ago. And so with this said, I have come to the end of reading two chapters, chapter 3 and chapter 4 of the Orion book, volume 2. And please buy yourself this book 2, both part 1 and part 2. Read it yourself. It is loaded with very interesting information, and it can help us in remembering whom we truly are. And it can also help us to finally see that we need to say, as an entire human soul group, we are done with the overlords. We are done with all the elite people. We are done with all the oligarch people. We as a soul group need to cry for help, and as a group need to stand and say enough is enough. This can turn the tables. If the human soul group, the majority of the human soul group or human beings, human souls are not doing this, they will end up in a timeline known as singularity, known as metaverse, where they will live the most horrific of horrific life ever picturized and imagined. Better said, it lacks words to describe the metaverse and its horrificness that the human soul will undergo if they do not stand for themselves as a group. And if they do not say, we are not going along with that metaverse singularity timeline anymore. All right. With this said, I truly have come to an end, and I want to thank you for listening along and for tuning in. And thank you for tuning in on the channels Rumble and Facebook and YouTube. Thank you so much. I hope that this information can bring some memories in your genetics back, and so that your genetics are start to remember this whole Tiamat story and start to remember that you are far more than you see in your mirror on daily basis. We are in actuality creators ourselves. We are not victims, we are not hopeless, we are not helpless, but we need to take our sovereignty back. We need to take this planet back, and we need to stand against all these beings whom are still pulling the strings here in this third construct. All right, I close off with a small piece of music known as Hope and created by Ben Sound. I see you next time. Thank you so much for coming along, and see you next time.